September 3rd, 1937, 2:20 in the morning. A back room above a pool room on Lenox Avenue. A man from downtown climbed the stairs alone. He set a leather ledger on the card table. Then he took off his hat and asked Bumpy Johnson to save his life. 3 warnings had come to Harlem that summer. One broke a bank on 135th Street. One sent a 15-year-old boy home without his shoes. One left 3 white lilies on a woman's front stoop. The 4th warning walked up those stairs with a hat in his hands. And the 4th never came back to Harlem. Not that night, not that year, not ever. No shot was fired, no car left in a hurry. The pool balls kept clicking downstairs like nothing had happened. So what was in that ledger? What did a man from Vito Genovese's own office see in Harlem that made him choose a stranger over his boss? To understand that, we have to go back 3 months. Back to a hot afternoon in June, when a number came out that nobody in Harlem had a right to lose on. Harlem ran on 3 digits. That was the whole engine of it. 3 numbers pulled from the day's racetrack handle, printed in the evening papers for anyone to check. You played a penny, you played a nickel. You played your birthday, your rent, your dead mother's age. If your 3 digits came, you got 600 to 1. 600 to 1 on a nickel was $30. $30 in 1937 could feed a family for a month. That was why the numbers mattered, not the gambling, the arithmetic of hope. Every morning runners moved up and down the avenues with slips folded small in their palms. Barbers took plays, beauticians took plays, elevator men, porters, church ushers, sanitation crews. The money came up off the sidewalk in pennies and went into policy banks run by Harlem people, and some of it came back down as loans, as burial money, as rent when rent was short. It was not clean. Nobody in it pretended it was, but it was theirs. For a few years in the early 30s it had not been theirs. A man from the Bronx named Dutch Schultz had taken it with guns and lawyers and terror, and Harlem had watched its own pennies walk downtown. Schultz died in a chop house in New Jersey in 1935. Harlem did not mourn. What came after Schultz was quieter and far more permanent. The Italian families did not need to kick doors. They negotiated. They took a percentage and left the storefront names alone. And the man who stood in the doorway between those 2 worlds, the man who could talk to a banker on 7th Avenue at noon and a capo on Mulberry Street at midnight, was Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. Everybody called him Bumpy. He was 32 years old that summer, slim shoulders, a pressed gray suit even in the heat, fingernails clean enough to make other men hide their hands. He carried 3 things in his pockets at all times: a fountain pen, a book of poems with the corners soft from handling, and a white cotton handkerchief starched stiff folded in 3. The handkerchief mattered more than the pen. You will see why. On the 22nd of June, a little after 5 in the afternoon, Bumpy Johnson was sitting in the back of a policy bank on 135th Street, drinking black coffee gone cold, listening to the fan push hot air around the room. The bank belonged to a man they called Pompey Greer, 61 years old, gold-rimmed glasses, a ledger for every year going back to 1924. Pompey had a radio on the shelf and a boy standing by the window with the evening paper. The 3 digits came out the way they always came out. Somebody read them. Somebody wrote them on a slate. 6, 0, 9. Time slowed. The boy said the numbers twice. Pompey's pencil stopped on the page. The fan turned once and squeaked. A fly landed on the rim of the cold coffee cup. Somewhere below the window, a woman laughed at something on the street. Nobody in that room breathed. "Say it again," Pompey said. The boy said it again. 609 had been played heavy that day, heavier than any number in the bank's 13-year history. Church combinations, dream book combinations, 1,100 separate plays across 41 runners. At 600 to 1, Pompey Greer owed more than he had in the safe, in the mattress, in the bank downtown, and in the walls. He owed about $26,000. He had maybe 4. Pompey took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked like a man who had just learned the date of his own funeral. "That number couldn't come," he said. Bumpy Johnson did not answer right away. He was looking at the slip on the desk, one slip sitting apart from the rest. It had come in that morning by a runner nobody recognized, from a customer nobody could name, with 3 digits written in blue ink and $1 writing on it. 609. A dollar play at 600 to 1 paid $600. It was not the biggest ticket in the pile, it was the neatest. Every other slip in that room was written in pencil, in a hurry, on paper cut from grocery bags and school tablets. This one was written on good stock. The digits were formed by somebody who wrote numbers for a living. Bumpy took the handkerchief out of his breast pocket. He unfolded it once. The starch made a small dry sound like a page turning. He laid the cloth over his fingers. He picked up the slip without touching it. "You know what this is," Pompey said. "Yes." "Say it then." "It's a letter," Bumpy said. The room went quiet again. Because a rigged number was not luck and was not theft. It was engineering. To make 3 specific digits come out of the day's racetrack totals, you needed money at the track and men at the windows in the last minutes of the last race. You needed the kind of reach that no Harlem crew had, and no Harlem crew ever would. Downtown had that reach. Downtown had just used it to break a 61-year-old man's business as a way of clearing its throat. Bumpy folded the slip inside the handkerchief. 3 folds. He put it in his inside pocket where the poems were. "How long can you hold them off?" he asked. 2 days, Pompey said. "Then people start knocking. Pay the small ones first." "With what?" "With mine." Pompey looked up sharply. "Yours." "Every play under $2 gets paid by Friday," Bumpy said. "In full, in cash. That's most of it. That's the point. Here is a thing worth understanding about the man. He could have let the bank fail. Bank failures happened. Harlem would have grumbled and moved to another banker and forgotten by Christmas. But a broken bank meant something specific to the people who had played those pennies. It meant the game was rigged. It meant hope was a fixed fight. Bumpy Johnson understood that his real business was not gambling. It was belief. He paid out over $9,000 in 4 days, most of it in singles and coins. He never once said whose money it was. The runners were told to say the bank was good. The bank was good, barely. And downtown got its answer to warning number 1, and the answer was silence, which is not the same thing as surrender. Now, the man who sent that number. In the summer of 1937, Charles Luciano was in Dannemora prison serving a sentence that ran longer than most men's lives. That left a chair empty at the head of the largest crime family in America. Vito Genovese was sitting in it. He was 39 years old, short, heavy through the shoulders. He wore round glasses with a faint tint to them, and he had a voice you had to lean in to hear. That was the detail everybody remembered about him. He never raised his voice, not once. Men who worked for him for years could not describe him shouting because it never happened. He made you come to him for the sound. He had another habit. He peeled apples with a small pearl-handled knife in one unbroken ribbon, and he did not look at the apple while he did it. He looked at you. If the peel broke, he set the apple down and did not eat it. That was Vito Genovese in 1937, patient, quiet, wearing his boss's chair like a borrowed coat and carrying something nobody in Harlem knew about yet. 3 years earlier, in September of 1934, a man named Ferdinand Boccia had been killed in Brooklyn over a card game and a piece of money. The case had gone cold. Cases did. But in the summer of 1937, cold cases in New York had begun to breathe again. There was a special prosecutor downtown who had already taken Luciano apart with witnesses nobody thought would talk. Vito Genovese could read a calendar. He was not building an empire that summer. He was packing. That is the fact that makes the whole story turn, and Harlem would not learn it for 11 more weeks. The first man Bumpy Johnson called after the rigged number was not a gunman. He was a pool hustler named Elmer Waddell, and everybody called him Chalk, because his fingertips were always powder blue and he left blue thumbprints on everything he touched. Coffee cups, door frames, money. Chalk had never fired a weapon in his life. What Chalk had was a memory like a filing cabinet and the ability to stand in a room for 2 hours while men forgot he was there. Nobody around here wrote that slip, Chalk said. I know. So somebody carried it up. Find the hand, Bumpy said. Chalk grinned. He had a chipped front tooth. A man who counts loud can't hear. The second was a woman named Cordelia Hines, sweet pea since she was 9 years old. She was 44, wore a gold tooth she was proud of, and moved slips through 6 blocks of tenements inside a folding church van. Nobody searches a church van, she liked to say. Not in Harlem, not on a Sunday. The third was Isaiah Pryor, deacon, 6'3", a longshoreman's back, and always the smell of horse liniment on him from a shoulder that had never healed right. Deacon stood at doors. That was his function and his whole art. He did not need to say anything at a door. When Bumpy told the 3 of them about the slip, Deacon said what men like Deacon say. Say the word and it's done. Bumpy folded his hands on the table. The word is wait. Deacon's jaw moved. They took 26,000 out of Pompey. They took nothing out of Pompey, Bumpy said. They put something in, a message. You don't answer a message by dying. So we do nothing. We count, Bumpy said. That's not nothing. Now let me tell you about a night on a train platform in South Carolina, because you cannot understand that word wait without it. Charleston, 1914. Ellsworth was 9 years old, the youngest of 6, and his family lived in a house where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors pray. His older brother Willie was accused that spring of killing a white man. It did not matter what happened, it mattered what was said. In Charleston in 1914, the two were not related. Men came to the street outside the house. Not a crowd, worse than a crowd. 3 men walking slow in no hurry at all because they knew nothing would stop them. Ellsworth watched from behind a curtain. He watched his father stand on the porch with his hat in his hands. His father was a tall man, a proud man, a man who had put shoes on 6 children, and on that porch he made himself smaller. He lowered his eyes. He said, "Yes, sir," twice. He said, "We don't want trouble." The men left. Willie was already gone, put on a northbound train that night by his mother, who did not cry until the train was out of sight. Here is the part Ellsworth carried for the next 50 years. When the men were down the block, his father came inside and sat down at the kitchen table and did not speak for an hour. Then he said one thing. I kept him alive. And Ellsworth understood at 9 years old that his father had not been weak on that porch. His father had been doing arithmetic, fast, brutal arithmetic, with his son's life on one side of it. The boy also understood something else, something no adult said out loud. There were rooms in the world where his family's arithmetic did not count. The night before Ellsworth himself was sent north, his mother pressed 3 coins into his palm, 2 dimes and a nickel, 25 cents to get from the Charleston docks to a sister's apartment on 144th Street. She closed his fingers over them and held his fist shut in both her hands. The coins were cold, the edges bit. Don't you ever let a man make you small, she said, "but don't you ever be a fool about it either." Those two sentences fought each other for the rest of his life. He decided sometime between the docks and Harlem that he would find the third thing, not smaller, not stupid, something else, something that came from counting better than the men across the table. Sweet Pea found the hand before Chalk did. The runner who carried the 609 slip was a 19-year-old named Otis Combs, who had been paid $4 by a man in a parked Packard on Madison Avenue to add one slip to a Harlem bank and keep his mouth shut about it. Otis was found sitting on a stoop on 131st Street, sick with it, waiting for somebody to come. Deacon brought him upstairs. The boy shook so hard he could not hold a glass. "I didn't know what it was," he said. "I swear on my mother." Bumpy poured him water. He set it down in front of him. He waited until the boy drank. Described the car. Green, black roof. Described the man. White, heavy, glasses with a little brown in them. Otis swallowed. He didn't yell at me. Bumpy went still. "Say that again." "He didn't yell," Otis said. "He talked so soft I had to lean in the window." The fan turned. The room was hot enough to taste. Deacon said, "That's not a soldier." "No," Bumpy said, "that's not a soldier." A capo does not sit in a parked car on Madison Avenue to hand $4 to a Harlem boy. A capo sends someone. The fact that this man came himself meant one of two things. Either he did not trust anyone with the errand, or the errand was too small to trust anyone with, and he had wanted to see Harlem for himself. Both answers were bad. Bumpy took $1 from his own pocket and put it on the table in front of Otis. "For the water," he said. "Go home. Say nothing. If a green Packard comes back, you walk the other way." The boy left. Deacon shut the door. "You know who that was," Deacon said. "I have an idea." "Then say it." Bumpy Johnson looked out the window at Lenox Avenue, at the streetlights starting to buzz on in the June dusk, at old men carrying folding chairs in from the sidewalk. "If I say it," he said, "you'll want to be brave." The second warning came 18 days later, and it came for a child. His name was Prentice Pryor. Everybody called him Pip. 15 years old, Deacon's sister's boy and the fastest runner in 6 blocks because he could climb a fire escape like water going up instead of down. On the 10th of July, Pip did not come home. Deacon went through Harlem that night like weather. He knocked on doors that had never been knocked on. He stood in a pool room on 8th Avenue and asked one question, and 11 men found somewhere else to be. Nothing. At 3 in the morning, a taxi stopped on 142nd Street. Pip got out. He was not hurt. That was the strange part. Not a mark on him, not a scratch, not a bruise. He had no shoes. He had walked from the cab to the stoop in his socks, and his socks were black on the bottom, and his hands were shaking. And in his shirt pocket there was money, $60, 3 20s folded once. Deacon counted it on the kitchen table while his sister held the boy. When he got to 60, he put the bills down very carefully as if they might go off. 60. Because that was the number downtown wanted. 60% of every policy bank in Harlem off the top, before expenses, before payouts, before rent. They had not sent a threat. They had sent an invoice with a child's name on it. Bumpy Johnson arrived at 4 in the morning. He came up the stairs slow. He took off his hat in the doorway. The kitchen smelled like liniment and coffee and fear. He sat down across from Pip and did not ask the questions everyone else had asked. "Were you cold?" he said. Pip blinked. "In the car." "Yeah, they had the windows down." "Did they feed you?" "A sandwich." "Did they say my name?" The boy looked at his mother, then at the floor. "They said, 'Tell your uncle's boss the second one's free.'" Deacon stood up so fast the chair went over. Bumpy did not move. "Sit down, Isaiah. That's my sister's son. I know exactly whose son he is." Then do something. I'm doing it now, Bumpy said quietly. I'm listening. Deacon stood there with his fists closed, breathing like a man who had run up 6 flights. Then he picked up the chair and sat in it. Bumpy turned back to the boy. He unfolded the white handkerchief from his breast pocket, 3 folds coming open. He wiped the boy's face with it once, the way an uncle would. Then he refolded it and put it away. You did nothing wrong, he said. Understand me, nothing. Pip nodded. Now tell me about their shoes. The room stopped. Their shoes? Everybody looks at faces, Bumpy said. Faces lie, shoes don't. Pip thought about it. He was a Harlem boy. He knew shoes. 2 of them had cheap ones, he said slowly. Cracked at the bend, but the one who drove had good ones, real good, and there was chalk dust on the toe like white powder. Not chalk, Bumpy said. Plaster. He stood up. He put his hat back on. Somebody in that car came from a building being worked on, he said. Get me the list of every job downtown pouring concrete this month. Chalk found it in 9 days. Not the building. Something better. He found the bookkeeper, because here is what nobody outside the business understood about the numbers racket. It was not a criminal enterprise that happened to use math. It was a math enterprise that happened to be criminal. 60 banks, 3,000 runners, 100,000 plays a day, most of them for pennies. Every one of them written down, carried, tallied, reconciled by nightfall. You cannot run that on muscle, you run it on ledgers. And downtown in a 2-room office above a wholesale olive oil business on Kenmare Street sat the man who kept the ledger that mattered. Salvatore Ciano, 34 years old, thin, neat. Sally books since he was a teenager, and he hated the name. He had gone to 2 years of accounting school at night. He wore paper cuffs to keep his shirt sleeves clean. He had never hurt a human being in his life, and he had written down, in his own careful hand, the arithmetic of things that had hurt a great many. He had a wife named Rose and a daughter who was 4. And he was the man who had written 609 on good stock in blue ink. He's not a shooter, Chalk said. He's a pencil. Everybody's a pencil, Bumpy said. Some of them just don't know what they're writing. You want me to take him? No. Then what? I want to know what he eats, Bumpy said. Where and when? There is a rhetorical thing I want to put to you now once, and then I will get out of the way. Every man in this story had the same information that summer. Only one of them was counting. The 3rd warning came in August, and it did not come to Bumpy Johnson at all. It came to a woman named Mabel. Mabel was his sister. She had taken in a 9-year-old boy off a boat from Charleston in 1915 and raised him in an apartment on 144th Street, and she had never once in 22 years asked him what he did for a living, because she already knew and she loved him anyway. She kept her stoop swept. She wore a wide gray hat to Abyssinian Baptist every Sunday and sat 6 rows back on the left. On the morning of the 14th of August, she came out her door at 7 and stopped. On the top step, laid out neat as a place setting, were 3 white lilies, cut long, still wet at the stems. The kind that came from a florist and not a window box. No note, no card. Mabel stood there in her housecoat and looked at those flowers for a long moment. Then she went and got a dustpan and she swept them into it, and she carried them down to the curb, and she did not touch them with her hands. She was a Charleston woman. She knew what flowers on a step meant. Time slowed. The lilies lay in the dustpan. A breeze came up off the Harlem River and moved the petals. A milk truck idled at the corner and the bottles rang together. 2 girls went by with a jump rope and stopped talking when they passed her. And Mabel Johnson stood on her own stoop in the sunshine with a funeral in her hands. Bumpy got there at 11. He looked at the curb. He looked at the step. He crouched down and touched the wet place on the stone where the stems had been. Then he took out the handkerchief, 3 folds. He wiped the stone clean. He wiped it until there was nothing there. He put the cloth in his pocket wet. He did not say a word for 2 full minutes. And Deacon later said it was the only time in 20 years he was afraid to be standing next to him. Then Bumpy said, "Get the delivery boy." The delivery boy was 11 years old and worked for a florist on 125th Street. He had been given $3 and an address by a man who came to the shop in a green car with a black roof. $3, 3 lilies, 3 warnings. Was he a big man? Bumpy asked. Not big, heavy. Did he wear glasses? The boy nodded. The brown kind. Did he yell at you? The boy looked confused. No, sir, he was nice. That night, Bumpy Johnson sat in his sister's kitchen with the radiator cold and the window open and the sound of a trumpet coming down from somebody's 3rd-floor apartment. Mabel made him eat. She always made him eat. He pushed the plate around. "You going to tell me?" she said. "No." "All right." She sat down across from him and folded her hands. "You remember Daddy on that porch," she said. He looked up. "You were 9, she said. "You remember it wrong." "I remember it fine." "You remember him small." Mabel shook her head slowly. "He wasn't small, Ellsworth. He was thinking. There's a difference, and you have never once in your life been able to see it." Bumpy set the fork down. "They came to your door," he said. "Yes, for me." "Yes." She reached across the table and put her hand flat on the back of his. "And here's what I know. You're not afraid of them killing you. You've never been afraid of that. It's the one thing about you that frightens me." "Then what am I afraid of?" Mabel's voice did not rise. "Being small again," she said. "You'd rather die standing in the street than say yes, sir, one time, and one day that's going to cost somebody who isn't you." The trumpet upstairs found a note and held it. Bumpy Johnson did not answer her. He turned his hand over and held hers, and that was all, and it was not enough, and both of them knew it. He left before midnight. He did not sleep. He went to a pool room on Lenox and sat in the back with a single lamp on and a pad of paper, and he did the only thing he had ever fully trusted. He counted. Here is what he counted. If downtown wanted 60% of Harlem policy, it wanted roughly $200,000 a year. Real money, serious money. But to get it, they had broken a bank in June, which cost them the goodwill of every banker who might have paid quietly. They had taken a child in July, which guaranteed that Harlem would talk. And they had put flowers on a church-going woman's stoop in August, which guaranteed Harlem would never stop talking. That was not how those men worked. Those men were patient. Those men would have spent 2 years easing into Harlem, buying bankers one at a time, making it feel like weather instead of war. 3 warnings in 8 weeks was not patience. 3 warnings in 8 weeks was a man in a hurry. Bumpy underlined the word hurry twice. Then he wrote a question under it. Why would the most patient man in New York be in a hurry? He looked at that question until the lamp got hot. And then he did something that had nothing to do with guns and everything to do with why his name outlived almost every other name in this story. He sent chalk to the library, not a figure of speech. The Harlem branch on 135th Street, newspapers on long wooden rods, the Amsterdam News, the Times, the Herald Tribune going back 3 years. "What am I looking for?" Chalk said. "Boccia," Bumpy said. "Ferdinand Boccia, September 1934, Brooklyn." That's a dead file. Find out who's asking about it. 9 days later, Bumpy Johnson was invited downtown. Not summoned, invited. There was a difference, and the difference was the whole point. The restaurant was on Thompson Street. Ground floor, 6 tables, no sign. The kind of place where the door was locked at lunchtime and opened for you. Deacon drove. Deacon was told to wait in the car. "That's not happening," Deacon said. "It's happening. Boss, If I need a man at the door, Bumpy said, I've already lost the meeting. He went in alone. Inside it smelled like garlic and cold marble and cigarettes. There was a fan on the ceiling. There was a bowl of fruit on the table. And there was Vito Genovese, sitting with his back to the wall in shirt sleeves with round glasses that had the faintest brown wash to the lenses. Two men stood behind him. Neither was introduced. Sit down, Genovese said. His voice was so quiet that Bumpy had to take the chair to hear him, which was the design of it. You want coffee? No, thank you. Genovese picked up an apple. He took out a small pearl-handled knife. You paid Greer's tickets, he said. 9,000, your own money. Some of it. Why? Because they were owed. Genovese started peeling. The blade went around and the ribbon came off in one piece, red on one side, white on the other, and he did not look down at it once. You know what I heard about you, he said. I heard you're educated and I heard you write poems. I read them. A man who reads poems in Harlem. The peel kept coming. That's either very smart or very lonely. It's cheaper than the Cotton Club. The corner of Genovese's mouth moved. It was not a smile, it was a note being taken. 60%, he said. That's not a number, that's a joke. It's arithmetic. It's not, Bumpy said. 60% off the top means the banks can't cover a hit. First big number that comes, they all break. Then there's no game, and 60% of nothing is nothing. Genovese kept peeling. Then they raise the odds. Then nobody plays. They'll play. They'll play somewhere else, Bumpy said. Harlem's been robbed before, and it's got good instincts now. The peel came off in one long, unbroken ribbon. Genovese laid it on the plate in a coil like something asleep. He set the naked apple down and did not eat it. Let me tell you what I think, he said, still soft, still without heat. I think you're a good man to have in a room. I think you've got more sense than the people you work for and more nerve than the people you work with. All right. And I think you're going to say yes to me by Labor Day, Genovese said, because I know what 6 rows back on the left looks like. The fan turned. The ice in an untouched glass shifted. Bumpy Johnson did not move his hands off the table. That was the whole of his answer, and he chose it deliberately because a man's hands are the loudest thing about him. Say it plain, he said. I did. Say her name. Genovese looked at him through the tinted lenses. I don't need to, he said. And that was the moment the opposing force stood at its absolute tallest. Not because of the flowers, not because of the money, because a man 40 blocks away who had never met Mabel Johnson knew which pew she sat in. Bumpy stood up. He put on his hat. He buttoned his jacket. Mr. Genovese. Yes. You broke the peel, Bumpy said. Genovese glanced down at the plate. The ribbon had split near the end. A small piece lay off to the side, curled apart from the rest. When Bumpy looked back up for the first and last time, something behind the glasses had changed. He walked out. He got in the car. He did not speak until they crossed 59th Street. Then he said one sentence. He's leaving the country. Deacon looked in the mirror. What? That's why the hurry, Bumpy said. He's not taking Harlem, he's cashing it. The pieces came together over the next 6 days, and they came together because Chalk had spent 9 days with newspapers on wooden rods. In late July, a Brooklyn grand jury had begun quietly re-examining the death of Ferdinand Boccia. In early August, 2 men who could have testified about that night had left New York. One for Florida. One for nowhere anybody could name. And on the 11th of August, a shipping agent on Whitehall Street had booked passage to Naples for a party of 2 under a name that was not Genovese, paid in cash, sailing in the fall. Chalk laid it all out on the card table above the pool room. He's got maybe 10 weeks, he said, maybe less. Which means he needs money that doesn't have his name on it, Bumpy said. He's got money. He's got money in things, buildings, loans, trucks, paper with witnesses attached. Bumpy tapped the table once. He needs cash that came from nowhere and goes nowhere. He needs it fast, and he needs a reason to explain the hole in the books to the men he answers to. Sweet Pea, sitting by the window with her fan closed in her lap, said it before anybody else got there. "Oh, Lord," she said, "that's us." "That's us," Bumpy said. And there it was. The rig number in June had not been a warning at all, or rather it had been a warning and something else at the same time, which was the elegance of it. $26,000 of Harlem's money had come off the street that day. Some of it had been paid out to real winners, but that dollar play written in blue ink on good stock had a name behind it, and a collector and a route. And in the ledger downtown, the whole event had been written up as a loss to the family, a bad month in Harlem, unstable territory, colored bankers can't hold a book. That was the story being told on Kenmare Street. Meanwhile, the money was walking to a boat. "He's stealing from his own people," Chalk said slowly, and using Harlem as the excuse. "Using Harlem as the excuse," Bumpy repeated. He sat back. You have to understand what that meant to a man who had spent his life doing arithmetic across a table from people who did not think he could. The insult was not the 60%. The insult was being cast as the reason a smart man lost money. Being the noise in someone else's books, being the small number. Deacon said, "So we go to the police." Everyone looked at him. "I'm serious. Special prosecutor's office is taking everybody's phone call this year." "And what do we tell them?" Bumpy said. "That an illegal numbers bank in Harlem was robbed by a legitimate businessman downtown. They'd put Pompey in a cell and give the man a citation." "Then the families," Sweet Pea said. "Go tell the other bosses he's dipping." "With what proof?" "My word." Bumpy shook his head. "A colored man's word against an acting boss buys me a closed casket and a nice notice in the Amsterdam News." "Then what?" Deacon said. Bumpy Johnson looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Below them, someone broke a rack and the balls scattered and knocked. "Their word," he said. "Whose word?" "The one who writes it down." The plan took 11 days to build and it had no guns in it. Bumpy Johnson did 4 things. First, he stopped paying anything at all. Not a dollar of tribute went downtown in the last week of August, not from Pompey, not from any bank Bumpy could reach. He did not announce it. He simply let the number in the ledger go quiet. Second, he had Sweet Pea move every drop in Harlem to a new schedule. Not to hide it, to make it visible. Suddenly the collections happened in daylight, on stoops in front of witnesses in the open air of 135th Street where anybody could watch and count. Third, he went to see Stephanie St. Clair. She was 50 years old that summer. Madame Queen. She had come out of Martinique and built a policy bank in the 20s that made her one of the wealthiest women in Harlem. And she had fought Dutch Schultz in the newspapers when men twice her size were hiding in New Jersey. She received him in a parlor on Edgecombe Avenue with china cups and a French clock ticking on the mantel. "You want my banks to stop paying," she said. "I want them to stop paying for 19 days. 19. Until the 12th of September. Madame Queen set her cup down. The clock ticked. "You know what happened the last time I refused men like that." "I know exactly what happened," Bumpy said. "You went to the newspapers and you went to the police and you made so much noise they decided you were more expensive than you were worth. And you disapproved. I was 26 and I thought you were reckless." He inclined his head. "I was wrong. You were early." Her mouth curved. "So what is different now?" "Now we don't make noise," Bumpy said. "Now we make a gap, and we let his own people notice it." She thought about that for a long time. "You are not asking me to fight him," she said. "No. You are asking me to help you audit him." "Yes." Madame Queen laughed then, one short, delighted, disbelieving sound. "Oh, you terrible young man," she said, "that is so much worse than a war." The fourth thing Bumpy Johnson did was the only part that required a human being to change his mind. For 3 weeks, Chalk had watched Salvatore Ciano. Not followed, watched. There is a difference, and Chalk was an artist at it. He learned that Sally Books took lunch alone at 12:15 at a counter on Grand Street and always ate the same thing and always read the financial pages and not the front page. He learned that Sally Books had a bad stomach and drank milk with his coffee. He learned that on the last Friday in August, Sally Books came out of that office at 9 at night with his collar undone and his hat in his hand, and stood on the sidewalk under a street lamp for 4 full minutes doing nothing at all. A man who stands still under a street lamp for 4 minutes is a man with something in his chest he cannot put down. Chalk came back and reported all of it. Then he added the thing that mattered. "He's been told to fix a number," Chalk said, "twice this month, and both times the fix came out of Harlem's column." "He knows," Bumpy said. "He knows. Does he know that he's the one they'll hand to the grand jury?" Chalk was quiet. "I don't think he's let himself get that far," he said. Bumpy Johnson stood up and went to the window. Lenox Avenue at dusk, the streetlights coming on one at a time down the block, buzzing as they warmed, a woman calling a child in from the corner, the smell of fried fish drifting up from somewhere near Small's Paradise. 3,000 runners out there, 60 banks, 100,000 people playing 3 digits on a hope. "Then we get him that far," he said. The fourth warning came on the 2nd of September. It came the way Bumpy had known it would come, and he had prepared for a soldier, and it was not a soldier. At 4 in the afternoon, a green Packard with a black roof stopped in front of a barber shop on 7th Avenue. One man got out, thin, neat, paper cuffs under his jacket sleeves, a leather ledger under his arm, and a hat in his hand. The whole block saw him. That was the point of the new schedule. Sweet Pea had made Harlem a room with the lights on. Sally Books walked into that barber shop and asked for Bumpy Johnson, and 8 men in that shop looked at him like he was a man walking into water. He was brought upstairs. The room above the pool room had a card table, 4 chairs, 1 hanging lamp, and a window open to the noise of the street. Bumpy was sitting with a cup of coffee and the book of poems face down on the table. "Mr. Ciano." Sally stopped. Nobody in New York called him that. "You know my name." "I know your handwriting," Bumpy said. "The name came after." Sally Books put the ledger on the table. He put his hat next to it. His hands were not steady, and he knew it, and he put them in his pockets, which is what careful men do. "I'm here to deliver terms," he said. "Say them." 60%. Effective the 7th. Every bank between 110th and 155th. Sally swallowed. "Collections through me, weekly, and there's a schedule of the drops." He said the last part fast, like a man reading his own eviction. Bumpy nodded slowly. "And if I say no, then I'm supposed to tell you there won't be a 5th conversation." Is that his phrase? Word for word. "He never raises his voice," Bumpy said. "Never." "Sit down." Sally hesitated. Then he sat. Bumpy poured coffee into a second cup and slid it across. Then he reached back and got a bottle of milk off the windowsill where it had been sitting in a bowl of ice all afternoon and set it down next to the cup. Sally Books stared at it. That bottle of milk did more work than any weapon in this story. "How long have you had the stomach trouble?" Bumpy asked. 2 years. "Since Boccia?" The room went very quiet. Downstairs someone broke a rack. The balls scattered and knocked and settled. "I don't know that name," Sally said. You wrote it in a ledger in September of 1934, Bumpy said. Not the killing. Nobody writes that down. But the money moved that week and somebody had to make it balance, and you're the one who makes things balance. Sally Books did not touch the coffee. You brought me up here to threaten me. No. Then what? I brought you up here to count with me, Bumpy said. One time, out loud, and then you can go. He turned over a sheet of paper. And for the next hour in a hot room above a pool room on Lenox Avenue, a Harlem racketeer and an Italian bookkeeper did arithmetic. Bumpy started with June. 26,000 out of Greer's bank on the 22nd. How was it entered downtown? As a loss. Whose loss? Sally's jaw tightened. Harlem's. Say the entry. Unrecoverable, territory unstable. And the $600 winning ticket. The dollar play, blue ink, good stock. Bumpy took the handkerchief from his pocket, unfolded it 3 times, and laid the slip on the table without touching it. Who collected on that? Sally looked at his own handwriting sitting on white cotton like evidence. A man in Yonkers, he said, who doesn't exist. How many men in Yonkers don't exist this year? Silence. Mr. Ciano, how many? 9, Sally said. 9 phantom winners, 9 collections, all entered as Harlem losses. Bumpy wrote the figures in a column and turned the paper around so Sally could read it right side up. That's about $41,000, best I can figure, correct me. Sally Books looked at the column. 43, he said quietly, and 600. Thank you. That doesn't prove anything. Sally's voice cracked upward. Territory does go bad, banks do fail, colored banks fail, all the... He stopped himself. Too late. Bumpy Johnson did not react. He let the sentence sit in the room and rot on its own. Go on, he said. Finish it. I didn't mean it that way. You meant it exactly that way, Bumpy said, and so does he. That's not the insult. Here's the insult. He tapped the column of numbers. He needed a place where a loss wouldn't be questioned. He looked at the whole city, and he picked us. Not because we're weak, because he was sure nobody downtown would ever bother to check our arithmetic. He set the pen down. He's right about that. Nobody ever checks ours. He looked up. But you're going to. Sally Books sat there with his paper cuffs and his bad stomach and $43,600 of other men's money written in his own hand. Why do you care where the money went? He said. I don't. Then what is this? This is September 2nd, Bumpy said. There's a ship. There's a Brooklyn grand jury looking at 1934. And there's one set of books in New York that explains where $43,000 went. He let it land. When he's on that water, Mr. Ciano, who's holding the book? Sally Books did not answer. He picked up the milk. His hand shook so badly the bottle rang against the cup. He put it back down without pouring. I have a daughter, he said. She's 4. I know. How do you know that? Because I asked, Bumpy said. The same way he asked which pew my sister sits in. Sally put his face in his hands. Bumpy Johnson let him have that. He got up. He went to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, which is a thing you only do when you have decided a man is not dangerous. Outside, dusk was coming down on Lenox Avenue. A radio somewhere was playing a dance band. The streetlights buzzed on. Here's what I'm going to say to you, Bumpy said without turning around, and I'll only say it once because I don't repeat offers. All right. Leave the book. Sally looked up. That's it? That's it. Leave the book, walk out that door, go home to Rose and put your daughter to bed. He'll kill me. He'll be looking for you in the river, Bumpy said, and you'll be on a bus. He turned around. There's a bus terminal on 34th Street. There's a ticket in your name that isn't your name. There's $300 and an address in Camden where a man will give you work keeping books for a fish company. Sally stared at him. Why would you do that? Because a dead bookkeeper is a story, Bumpy said. A missing one is a question. Questions travel further. And the ledger? The ledger goes to 3 men who count better than he does. Sally Book's mouth opened. You wouldn't get within a mile of those men. I wouldn't, Bumpy agreed. But Madame Queen's lawyer has an office on Nassau Street, and he has a clerk, and that clerk plays cards on Thursdays with a man who works for the Mangano family. He almost smiled. Nobody searches a church fan, Mr. Ciano, and nobody watches a clerk. The clock on the wall said 7:40. Time slowed. Sally Books put both hands flat on the leather cover of the ledger. The lamp swung slightly on its cord and the light moved across the table. Downstairs the balls knocked and settled. A trolley went by on Lenox and the window glass hummed in its frame. The bottle of milk sweated in the heat and one drop ran down and touched the wood. And a thin man with paper cuffs slid a book 11 inches across a card table. That was all it was, 11 inches. It was the loudest thing that happened in Harlem that year. Bumpy Johnson did not grab it. He unfolded the white handkerchief, 3 folds coming open. He laid it over the ledger like a cloth over a face. Then he said, "Take your hat." Sally Books stood up. He took his hat off the table. He got as far as the door. "Mr. Johnson." "Yes." "He said something about you back in July." Sally turned around. "He said that one counts." Bumpy Johnson looked at him for a long moment. "Tell your daughter you were good at your job," he said. The bookkeeper went down the stairs. He walked past 8 men in a barber shop who never once mentioned him again. He got into a taxi on 7th Avenue. He did not go back to Kenmare Street. He did not go back to the green Packard which sat at the curb for 2 days until somebody came for it. Salvatore Ciano never came back to Harlem. Not that night, not that year, not ever. And Harlem, which knows how to keep a secret when the secret belongs to it, closed its doors behind him like water closing over a stone. The rest took 9 days, and almost none of it was visible. On the 3rd of September at 2:20 in the morning, Bumpy Johnson sat in that same room and read a stranger's handwriting by lamplight for 4 hours. He was not looking for the theft. He already knew the theft. He was looking for the one page that a man with money and lawyers could not explain away. He found it near the back. 9 phantom collections entered in one column, and on the facing page in the same hand 9 dates. Every one of those dates fell on a Tuesday. Every one of those Tuesdays, a cash deposit of exactly the same amount had gone into an account at a bank on Whitehall Street. Whitehall Street, where the shipping agents were. Bumpy sat back in the chair. "There it is," he said to nobody. Because a man can argue about territory. A man can argue about percentages. A man can look a room full of bosses in the eye and say the colored banks went bad and half of them will nod. No man in that world can explain 9 Tuesdays and a steamship office. On the 4th of September, Madame Queen's attorney received a package by hand. He never opened it. That was the arrangement. On the 6th, a clerk carried a plain envelope to a card game on Elizabeth Street and lost $11 and left early. On the 8th, a soldier from a family that was not Genovese's stood in a doorway on Kenmare Street and asked to see the Harlem accounts. He was told the bookkeeper was out. He asked again on the 9th. He was told the bookkeeper had not come in. On the 10th of September 1937, no man in Harlem was visited by anybody from downtown. Not one bank, not one runner, not one door. Sweet Pea noticed it first because she was the one who moved through 6 blocks of tenements every day with her fan. "Nobody came," she said. "I know. Nobody came anywhere." Bumpy Johnson nodded slowly. Then it worked, he said, or it's about to be very bad. Deacon put it plainer. How do we know which? We'll know by Sunday. Sunday was the 12th. Bumpy Johnson put on a gray suit and a gray hat, and he walked his sister to Abyssinian Baptist Church and sat 6 rows back on the left on the aisle, where anybody who wanted him would find him without any trouble at all. He sat through the whole service. He did not look at the doors. Mabel beside him in the wide gray hat put her hand on his arm halfway through the second hymn and left it there. Nobody came. Afterward, on the sidewalk in the good clothes and the good weather, with people greeting each other and children pulling at collars, Mabel said, "Is it done?" "It's done." "Did you kill somebody?" "No." She looked at him a long moment. "Then how?" "I counted," Bumpy Johnson said, and she laughed, right there on 138th Street, in a way she had not laughed since Charleston. Here is what actually happened, stated plainly, because a story owes you that. The order was withdrawn. There was no meeting, no truce, no handshake in a restaurant on Thompson Street. Men like Vito Genovese did not withdraw orders out loud. The order simply stopped existing. The schedule of drops was never used. The 60% was never collected, not that week, not that month, not that decade. The 2 men who had taken a 15-year-old boy for 3 hours in July were reassigned to Brooklyn by people who were annoyed with them, and neither ever set foot above 110th Street again. Pompey Greer reopened with money loaned to him by 3 other banks at no interest, which had never happened in Harlem before and happened often afterward. And in the fall of 1937, Vito Genovese left the United States. He sailed for Italy with a great deal of cash and a great deal of explaining behind him. He did not come back for 15 years. When he finally did, in 1945, he came back to a family that had rearranged itself around his absence, and he spent the rest of his life clawing at the chair he had once sat in so comfortably. He died in a federal prison in 1969. Bumpy Johnson outlived him by 19 days. Now be careful with a story like this. Records from that world are thin, and the men in it did not keep minutes. What is documented is the shape of it: Luciano in prison, Genovese in the chair. Harlem's numbers squeezed and squeezed again. Genovese out of the country by the end of that year. The ledger and the bookkeeper live in the place where Harlem's memory has always kept its best material, told at kitchen tables, told in barbershops, told the way the neighborhood needed it told. Whether there were exactly 3 warnings nobody can prove, but everybody who told it said 3. And they all said the 4th one never came back. 3 numbers. That was Harlem's whole engine. 3 digits in the evening paper and a nickel and a hope that the arithmetic was honest. 3 men walking slow down a Charleston street in 1914 while a 9-year-old watched from behind a curtain. 3 coins pressed into a boy's hand at a dock. 3 warnings in the summer of 1937. 3 white lilies swept off a stoop with a dustpan by a woman in a housecoat who refused to touch them. Bumpy Johnson kept that ledger for 11 years. Nobody knows what became of it. Deacon said it went into the Harlem River in 1948. Chalk said it went into a wall on 144th Street. Sweet Pea said he burned it the day his daughter was born and never explained why. The handkerchief is easier to trace. He carried one every day of his life after that. Starched, folded in 3. Cold from the drawer in the morning and warm from his chest by evening. Men who knew him in the 50s and 60s said he would take it out at strange moments. In a car, at a table, in the middle of a conversation about nothing. He would unfold it once, look at it, then fold it again, 3 folds, and put it away. They thought it was vanity, a dandy's habit, a dapper man from a dapper era. It was arithmetic, because power is not the loudest man in the room. The loudest man in that story wore tinted glasses and never had to shout, and he still lost, and he lost for a reason that has nothing to do with courage. He assumed nobody uptown was counting. He was wrong about Harlem. Men were wrong about Harlem for 50 years. Bumpy Johnson never fired a shot that September. He never took a hostage, and he never made a speech. He did something harder. He sat in a hot room with a frightened bookkeeper and a bottle of cold milk, and he offered a man a way to stop being somebody else's excuse. That was the trap, not fear. Mercy, with the numbers already done. 2:20 in the morning, a back room above a pool room on Lenox Avenue. A hanging lamp swinging slightly on its cord. A hat on a card table next to a ledger. A white handkerchief laid across the leather like a cloth over a face. And downstairs all night the sound of pool balls knocking and settling. Knocking and settling. The sound of a neighborhood that had no idea it had just been saved by addition. 3 warnings came to Harlem that summer. The 4th walked in on its own 2 feet. And Bumpy Johnson sent it home in a way that no one ever forgot, because he understood the one thing his enemies never did. You do not have to be the strongest man at the table. You only have to be the one who checked the math. And that's where the story ends. But the stories of Harlem don't. If you enjoy the untold stories, the forgotten moments, and the legends that shaped an era, make sure you subscribe to The World of Bumpy Johnson. New stories are coming, and some of them are even harder to believe than this one. Until next time, keep listening, keep questioning, and remember, every legend has a story.